Good evening, one and all. Welcome to the Pink and Friday night preview show. Norwich City welcome Wycombe Wanderers to Carrow Road tomorrow. They're looking for 3 wins out of 3. Fingers crossed that is the case. I'm Connor Southwell, joined by Paddy Davitt, and over the next sort of 45 minutes to an hour, we'll be taking your questions, taking a look ahead to this one, and analysing what was said in the press conference earlier today. Paddy, first and foremost, how are you doing? And another week inside. I'm getting very used to these 4 walls now. I might name them at one point, I'm not sure. But it's been a busy week in terms of football, hasn't it? We didn't do a podcast post Birmingham, so it seems like a good place to start, really. What did you make of that performance? Probably, in my view at least, probably the best we've seen so far from Norwich this season.
Yeah. I mean, more of the same for me. Following on from the Derby and the Bournemouths, Rotherham less so. That was a bit more open, but teams who are showing Norwich utmost respect and almost don't want to take them on at a game of football. So backhanded compliment straight away. And I think Karanka's setup was the most marked example of that. It was literally, as Daniel said, first time he's played 5 at the back this season, but it was effectively 10 at the back, or 9 plus Scott Hogan, who is absolutely rank up against Grant Hanley. But and ultimately the challenge again the other night, as it was prior to the international break, as it probably will be tomorrow, without wanting to be disrespectful for Wycombe, is you're going to have the majority of the ball, Norwich. Can you break us down? And ultimately, yes, they're winning these games, but we haven't quite seen them cut loose in the fashion I think we'd all like to. Certainly the manager, as he keeps reiterating, he'd like to win a game a bit earlier than 87, 95 minutes on the clock. It's not good for his heart, or probably a lot of Norwich fans, really. But when all said and done, 2 wins out of 2, you can't argue with that. And if they were to make it 3 out of 3 tomorrow, given it's a big week they're going into then, Brentford away midweek, and Bristol, who've started well, so it would set them up perfectly. But feels like still trying to get to know you a little bit in terms of all facets of what they're trying to achieve. But you can't argue with getting results along the way. And ultimately, let's hope come tomorrow evening, we're talking about Norwich have finally found their form in front of goal, and that's the only thing that's really missing at the moment. You know, Daniel's trotted out these stats for the last few days. You know, top in possession in the league and entries into the final third, even shots. You know, they're peerless, really. But ultimately, the efficiency isn't quite there, and that's why they're leaving it so late. So, it's been a good week. It's been a good week to be a Norwich fan, I would have thought, and sort of does feel now with each passing result and each passing win, maybe we're getting the door closed on all that went before last season, and we can actually look forward with relative optimism. Because, you know, if you're having 60, 70% of possession against teams and you're creating chances, it just feels like the final pieces of the jigsaw, really. If they slot into place, it could be away you go. You know, Gareth Ainsworth, we'll get into this in due course, but Gareth Ainsworth has said in his pre-match he feels Norwich are potentially the best side in the division. And for me, I wouldn't disagree if they can add that cutting edge.
Yeah, I'm with you. I can see we've got plenty of comments already. Make sure you get them in, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. Brandon Francis, hello from Japan. Hello. I hope you're well and keeping safe. Any questions, any comments, put them in, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. We'll also have some clips from Daniel Farke's press conference today. Both me and Pad are in that, as well as the Google video that you've all come to love with Tony's Fact. We'll find out what that is this week, which I must say I'm very intrigued and excited about. Paddy, you referenced it there in terms of the test tomorrow. Wycombe Wanderers, I mean, I'm got their stats in front of me. No wins, no draws, 6 defeats, 1 goal scored, 13 conceded. I mean, Norwich are going to be the favourites in a lot of games this season, but probably not to the extent they will be tomorrow, I would argue, against a side who, I mean, it's a wonderful story how they've come through the divisions, but still have members of their League Two promotion winning squad from a few years ago.
Absolutely, yeah. I did just caught my eye. I saw the odds, the betting odds there earlier in the day, and I think Wycombe are 11-1 to come to Carrow Road and win the game, which in a 2-horse race sort of underlines certainly how the bookmakers see it. Really, Norwich should romp to this game, but I'll avoid the well-worn phrase that we all associate with Norwich, that these games can be potential banana skins. But I think, listening to Daniel today, it was interesting. I put to him that the parallels are obvious for me. You know, you've got Gareth Ainsworth there bringing a Wycombe team up, largely the same squad who got promoted out of League One, trying to compete really against rivals who've got far bigger resources, far more financial power, and trying to bridge the divide. And for me, that is what Daniel faced last season in the Premier League. And I think as a result, I don't think there'll be any complacency on his part, because he understands what they're trying to achieve in terms of Wycombe, and will show them the utmost respect. And you just hope that filters through to his players as well, because by no stretch, given, as we've just discussed, Norwich aren't putting teams to the sword, so there shouldn't be any complacency. And if they're not at it, as Daniel said, you're 2 or 3% off in this league. Doesn't matter who you're playing. It's going to be very difficult to win games. And he's done a fantastic job there, given their limited resources. But it does look on the balance of those first 6 games, it's going to be a long, hard season for them. And as Daniel said, don't give them tomorrow any encouragement, almost to kickstart their season. We all know the dynamic, and you can imagine Gareth Ainsworth will be using that. Look, lads, you're written off here. Nobody's giving you an earthly. Just go out and show that you belong at this level. And the pressure is on Norwich, and the pressure is on Daniel Farke and his players tomorrow. So they'll have to deal with all that. But ultimately, a team who haven't picked up a point in 6 games, coming to Norwich, there should only be one winner. But they went to Reading midweek, who were the early leaders, and by all accounts, they got beat 1-0. And Daniel has clearly watched the tape, felt that was a very harsh result. So straight away, I would look more at that, given that's their last performance, than I would maybe the getting to know you process they're in currently in terms of the Championship. They're clearly not turning up at places, and bar the opening weekend, I think Blackburn put them to the sword. But since then, you look at the results, they're only losing games by the odd goal, 2 goals. They're not seemingly a team who are completely out of their depth. So Norwich will have to be bang at it tomorrow for me.
Yeah, and by all accounts, I think they were fairly unlucky not to get a point at Reading on Tuesday night. But you're right, 3 out of their 6 games, they've lost by a single goal. Before we delve in and talk about the football, I'm going to throw one at you. As we sit here right now, who's the cooler manager, Gareth Ainsworth or Daniel Farke, do you think?
Well, one's a musician, wannabe musician, and the other one looks like he's Liam Gallagher with his Parker most weeks. So, I don't know. They can debate that themselves, can't they? But they're both pretty cool characters. I think probably Ainsworth wins it on the hair. I think he's got a few more flowing locks than Daniel. That's no offence on Daniel's hair, but he's a younger man, isn't he? So could be some very cool vibes in the dugouts tomorrow afternoon, mate.
Yeah, especially if he wears those shoes he wore in the playoff final. I seem to recall they were very. I'll use the word vibrant, but other words are
urban, mate.
Urban, yeah, yeah, like Norwich's third kit. You take your pick. Let's delve into a few comments that we've got then, and then we'll look back at Daniel Farke's press conference. Dubai Canary, hello, thanks again for watching. He said would like to see us. Sorry, I'm just trying to read this. Would have liked to have seen us won the game against Wycombe by half. Sorry, I would have liked to see us win the game against Wycombe by half time, and Daniel Farke can give the bench guys a lot longer to run out. He did say, and it was specifically about Mario Vrancic, and we'll come on to this later, about sort of using his squad a little bit better. So I'll probably park your comment for the time being, because we'll come back to Vrancic and Daniel Farke's comments a little bit later. Matthias Angelson, I hope I've said your name right, said Norwich's high press, particularly triggered by the fullbacks, was the difference maker against Birmingham. That was the difference between that win and Derby. Farke has adapted us to break down the bus being parked against us. He did say the first game, I think it was before Rotherham, that they had worked during that international break specifically on how to break down teams. Did you see a bit more evidence against Birmingham, just reflecting on that game a bit more, that they looked a bit more capable of doing that? And maybe it was aided by the return of Todd Cantwell and Emi Buendia and those two playing together, but they did have a bit more quality about them in the final third, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, for me, straight away, it's those two players. Those two players, Mario's probably in the conversation, but those two are Norwich's most creative midfield players, certainly. And in the template they're finding themselves now, which is, take Birmingham as the most recent example, very well drilled, very unambitious in terms of approach, but filling holes with lots of bodies in front of their 18-yard box. Cantwell and Buendia, absolutely vital that they're in this side and focused as they were the other night. And okay, it didn't translate into goals, but they felt like there was more guile and more imagination about Norwich's work. And of course, dropped into that mix, and we got into that earlier today with Daniel, was pairing Pukki with Hugill. Essentially, you can debate, as Daniel kind of alluded to, the base formation, whether it's 4-2-3-1 or it's a 4-4-2 or whatever. Daniel isn't too hung up on that, but ultimately, if you can get on the same pitch, Buendia, Cantwell, Pukki and Hugill, and they start to develop an understanding, then I think for me, that's probably their best quartet to try and solve this conundrum. How do you translate overwhelming superiority in terms of possession into actually cutting edge? Yes, Adam Eder would come into the conversation there. Puerta and Hernandez, when fit, against certain types of opponent. But I think week in, week out, those four, for me, they look their strongest attacking quartet, because you've got a little bit of everything there. You've got Hugill's aerial power in the box. You've got Pukki's cunning as well, if we can get him back to sort of the levels he has shown previously. And Buendia and Cantwell, in my opinion, Norwich's two best creative midfielders. So, that's a fair point about the press, but I think within that, it's probably being able to call on an Emi Buendia and a Todd Cantwell when, if we go back to Bournemouth, for reasons we all know, they wasn't involved, and it was crying out for that type of imagination on the day, wasn't it?
Yeah, it certainly was. In terms of what you said there about Pukki and Hugill, and allied with obviously the news that Marco Stiepermann isn't going to be fit enough for a start tomorrow because of that illness that ruled him out. So he's still not 100%, but Daniel Farke said he could be an option for the match day squad. Do you see Norwich going with that approach again, particularly given that Wycombe are probably going to deploy a similar sort of tactic to Birmingham, Derby, Bournemouth, I guess, if you want to use that, in terms of allowing Norwich the ball and saying, well, we're quite happy if you have 70% of the ball. If we have, 24% like Birmingham did, but we get a point, we're fairly happy with that. So do you see Daniel Farke going down that route again with Pukki and Hugill? Yeah,
certainly from the start. And obviously, he also went on to say today that Teemu had just had about a cramp and there was no issues and he's fully available for tomorrow. So in that context, I wouldn't see him really making any changes to that 11. That's pretty much, obviously Eder was playing instead of Pukki at Rotherham, but that's essentially the same group of players who've started both these last two wins. And it's quite clear that Daniel's very keen on trying to keep it as settled as possible at this stage of the season, still relatively early, just in terms of trying to build some momentum, not only in performances, but probably more importantly now in terms of results. And if that is the case, and you've got a group of players who've managed by hook or by crook to get 2 wins out of 2, then I wouldn't really see him making any changes. But it's nice to have an Eder or Puerta if Wycombe are as obdurate as Birmingham were, and it gets deeper into the second half, and even Mario in that conversation. You've got options to change it. But from the start tomorrow, would be frankly amazed if it's not the same 11.
It was interesting hearing Daniel speak today about playing those two and perhaps the wider implications of the team. It's not as simple as he outlined today, that you put 2 strikers on the pitch and suddenly you score goals. You have to get a structure in place more broadly that supports your team in terms of an offensive sense. And it was interesting to hear him kind of outline that today in his press conference.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it was very good. I thought, how he broke it down that, okay, you can put 2 strikers on the pitch, and then, as I say, if you want to debate their 2 out and out in a 4-4-2, or whether it's more Pukki, more withdrawn, irrelevant. You got 2 on the pitch, but he says more or less what I took him to sort of outline today is that probably only going to work if you've got, as he said, wingers, nominally wingers in Buendia and Cantwell, who come in and play as 10s to provide that link through the centre of the park, but then, to add to that, it's almost like the layers of complexity. Then, if you're going to do that route, then you're going to need your fullbacks really to give you the width, which of course we know Aarons does, and Quintilla, he looks a better attacking fullback than a defensive one to me. So it's all clearly interconnecting parts, and it isn't just put Pukki on a pitch with Hugill and everything's going to be solved. There's a little bit more nuance to that, and as he said, that worked against Birmingham. It might not work against other opponents, maybe ones who show a bit more ambition. Then you might need proper wingers in terms of Puerta and Hernandez when fit, Eder at the minute. So, he basically ended that conversation by saying, look, it's great if we can keep opponents guessing. If Wycombe aren't 100% sure how they're going to line up tomorrow and what the personnel are going to be in terms of an opponent trying to prepare for Norwich, that's what Daniel wants. He wants options, he wants variety, and the more the merrier. So, by no means is the way he went midweek and may go tomorrow probably going to be set in stone. I think it will be horses for courses, and that ultimately comes down to the depth you've got in your squad. If you've got that type of resource at this level, and we're not even talking about Kieran Dowell, for example, who's not available till January, then, most weeks I think they're going to fancy their chances at this level.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, whenever we kind of discuss the options that Norwich City have, certainly in an offensive sense, we seem to come back to the word variation. It does feel like Norwich now can kind of tailor their approach. And again, Daniel Farke kind of outlined that today at his press conference in terms of there may be games where Adam Eder has to play out wide, for example, and maybe they do sacrifice one of Cantwell or Buendia, as we saw at Rotherham, where the game's a little bit different. So it does feel now that they're in a position to mix things up a lot better than they were, especially last season, but probably also in a couple of seasons before that as well.
Wouldn't disagree. Yeah. Again, no, I mean, the comparison with 2 years, I think you always have to bear in mind, and Daniel's touched on this already, that really they came from left field and there was no pressure expectancy, and there was probably a lack of respect shown towards that. It was Norwich who'd finished 15th, I think it was, under Daniel in his first season, and nobody really expected them to come out of the pack and do what they did that season. So you contrast that with where they're at now, which is, Birmingham happy to grind out a point at all costs. Derby the same until they got a bit of magic from Wayne Rooney. Even Bournemouth, who came down with them, once they got themselves in front down on the South Coast, that second half they showed no ambition whatsoever. So that's why I tend to avoid now harking back to 2 years ago, because the expectation around Norwich this time around, it's night and day. So that is why, to bring it full circle, they do need a bit more variety, because I think 2 years ago it was pretty formulaic. I think once they got on a roll, the team picked itself when there was no injuries or suspensions, and even the style of play didn't change hugely from week to week. I think they will need to be a little bit more nuanced this time around, just because I don't think there's going to be too many opponents, maybe unless you're talking to the Watfords of this world, maybe at this level, who want to take them on. I think the default position will be, we can't really play you a game of football. We're going to just try and make it as hard as possible, and then hopefully get something on the counter. And Norwich need to be able to counteract that. And as I say, the more variety they've got to their play and to their tactics and approach, the better. Because if they just keep pounding and pounding and pounding away, I don't think that's necessarily going to get them the points they need to get to where they want to get this season.
No, agreed, and it is it's absolutely pivotal. I mean, we mentioned variation there. Someone commented early on about the importance of getting players on from the bench who can impact games. Mario Vrancic certainly did that on Tuesday night. We're going to speak about him in a moment or two, but here firstly is what Daniel Farke had to say about the Bosnian midfielder today.
Yeah, it's you wouldn't like to hear it, but it's definitely Mario is a player who is great to have a bit in the pack, more like the best cards by in your hand by playing poker and not showing it too early, but when it counts, then this card will bring the success, and this is the most important. So we're not playing football in order to that Mario Vrancic wins a minute statistic. We are playing football that we win football games, and for that I'm totally happy that we have him.
Oh, I got caught having a sip of tea there. There's Daniel Farke.
Amateur Southwell.
Ever the professional. That was Daniel Farke.
Do what I do and just drink mid performance,
Yeah, well, yeah, we could just make it a thing. So it's tea for anyone wondering. But there you go. That's Daniel Farke on Mario Vrancic. It was an interesting comment. It kind of feels to me, and it has done as the weeks have gone by, that almost they begin with Skip and other usually, but as of recent, it's been Lucas Rupp. That keeps them in the game. That builds the base, and then they'll bring on a Mario Vrancic maybe to try and win it. And that seems like he's kind of been cast in the role of super sub, I guess, if you want to use that term. And does that maybe say more about his quality or more about his lack of physicality for you? Is it a backhanded compliment, I guess?
Well, for me, it's, and Daniel referenced it after Rotherham. Obviously, a lot of the focus inevitably is on the top end of the pitch, but he said there was another area he wasn't happy with, and that was, quote, controlling the counters. That he felt Rotherham got through them a bit too easily. Now, ultimately, you put Rupp and Skip in that side, that shouldn't be happening. And he felt they were a lot better today. You referenced that he felt they were a lot better in that aspect against Birmingham. That might be allied to Birmingham maybe showing less ambition compared to Rotherham. But yeah, I think ultimately he wants to build into games, certainly at this early stage of the season. And to do that, I think he feels there's a better platform given by Skip and Rupp in terms of the protection afforded the back four. And then as the game hopefully opens up, or as if Norwich need to chase it as they have done in the last two games, what happened midweek, Skip came out of the equation, kept Rupp on the pitch, and then Mario comes on, and that's almost the sea change in terms of the balance of their midfield. And I think as much as Mario Vrancic is technically a very good player, I don't think if your first port of call with your central midfielders in any given game is to be solid, you're not putting Mario in there as one of the two most solid central midfielders in Norwich's mix. So makes perfect sense for me at the minute. I can understand why the trainer thought, well, if you put him in from the start, then because he's such a creative type and Norwich having so much possession, why don't you just try and almost win the game from the get-go? But, ultimately, I think maybe that's a hangover from the Premier League era where Daniel got a little bit of fright halfway through, and remember it was Tete and McLean for the foreseeable because he felt they were too open and too porous, and there was too much of a lack of protection for the back four. So maybe now, in his own mind, when he's setting his team up, certainly from the start of games, even at a lower level, he's far more comfortable with a Rupp and Skip. And to be fair, they are progressive types. They're just not maybe what Mario would offer in terms of that. As Daniel says, he's world class in terms of being able to see a pass and almost feel a pass. He doesn't even have to see it. He could just execute. Now, you wouldn't say Skip or Rupp are those type of players, but ultimately it's about, winning games, using his resource in any way he sees fit, and he's coming off the back of 2 wins. So I don't think we should really question too much of what he's done so far. If they take anywhere near the proportion of chances that he created in the last 2 games, they're 2 comfortable wins. And then I don't think we're probably debating too much. It's probably just because it's very narrow at the minute, and maybe people feel, well, with a Mario on the pitch, because he's such a creative type, they probably would create a little bit more, maybe a bit earlier. But no, I can kind of, if you're asking me, I can kind of see where Farke's going with that, and what a great option to bring on, as he showed again, midweek, and he was good. He was good against Derby as well, I thought, and Rotherham for that matter. So, there's a player who really, I think, is being used in the best way for me at this stage. Now, if Norwich do get on a roll and do start to put sides to the sword, then maybe you could afford to start him in games because there'll be so much confidence and self-belief in that group. But I still feel at this stage, it still feels like they're still trying to incrementally grow into the season. And if that is the case, maybe Farke's right to err a little bit on the side of caution.
Absolutely. I've got this vivid memory of being in Old Trafford back in, when was that, January, and Mario Vrancic started, didn't he?
Tete, yeah.
Next to Tete, and defensively, it just didn't offer them the protection they needed. I think, again, you referenced that Tete and McLean partnership. That was his most favoured in the Premier League, wasn't it? And we'll try and skip round Rupp, no pun intended, because we'll come back to him a bit later on. But in terms of, and you mentioned it, because I think whenever we do these, I think probably one of the, if we're going for consistency of comments, every week we get the same question, which is, do you think Mario Vrancic will start? Is it just his productivity and his numbers, the fact he does contribute goals and key moments within games, that maybe makes him a bit more favourable amongst supporters to say a Lucas Rupp or an Ollie Skip, do you think? And if so, do you think that's one of the key reasons why he has maybe stuck around when Tom Tribal and Mo Leitner maybe haven't, for different reasons? But in terms of his productivity and what he can offer, and because he can sort of turn a game on its head, is that one of the reasons you think that they've kind of stuck with him, despite him being part of those 2 eras that maybe they've tried to depart from a little bit this season?
Yeah. I mean, there was talk of him. I mean, I'd have to check his contract status, but I think he's entering the final 12 months. So ultimately, this might be the final stages of Mario's Norwich career, really, because, time waits for no man, and if probably Alex Tete is going to move on, it might be Mario goes at the end of this season as well, and that'll probably divide opinion. But the reason he's still in the building is probably that, is because if you draw in a comparison with the Tribals and the Lightners, I don't think they could necessarily turn a game with a magic pass or as we saw the other night, the innate sense to get on the end of that Ida cut back when he's cut back in, and then the quality to finish it. I don't think those 2 previous players I've mentioned there would necessarily give you that. And ultimately, in a tight game, he's settled it with his piece of skill, and he's done that routinely. He did. I mean, he got Norwich over the line. If it was one player who got Norwich over the line 2 years ago in a string of performances, we don't need to go back. Sheffield Wednesday Blackburn and Villa as well on the final day. It was Mario Vrancic. So he's still, as Daniel likes to also mention, he is 2 years older than that point, and he wasn't the most athletic or mobile of players anyway. So I think, again, use him sparingly, but definitely use him, because there's no doubt, and we've already seen it amply demonstrated midweek, that in a game where Norwich are running out a little bit of ideas and time, what an option to bring on from the bench. But I don't risk of repeating myself. For me, he's getting it right. I think it's Mario to come on and it's Skip and Rupp to start. I mean, nobody could say that Rupp hasn't merited his place in the side at the minute. I thought he was as good as Cantwell midweek. So he for me is a shoo-in at the minute. Whether Mario edges out Skip, well, I don't see that either, because they really think Skip is pivotal to what they're trying to do in terms of knitting the back to the front and controlling games as well. So I think it's really a case of those two will be, for the foreseeable, Norwich's central midfielders.
Yeah, 31 years of age, Mario Vrancic, last year of his contract. I think he's made more appearances for Norwich City than he has any other side in his career. And you reference his sort of impact from the bench, 4 goals in terms of his sort of 3-year spell now at the club, that he's changed the result essentially. And Tuesday night was another one of those where Norwich were heading for a point, and he made sure they've got all 3. I think it's 10 points that he's won Norwich almost single-handedly from those moments. Sheffield Wednesday, the most famous example. Let's try and get through some of your comments then. Colin Hildreth on Facebook said Birmingham will be at least a strong mid-table team this season, and we absolutely taught them a footballing lesson without killing them off. Buzzing for tomorrow's game. Will on YouTube, do you think there is scope for rotation of the starting 11 given fixture congestion? There's an interesting, just to ask a different question along a similar theme. There was an interesting sort of comment about Teemu Pukki today, and Daniel Farke gave him a day off in the week, which perhaps he hasn't necessarily had for a few years at least.
Yeah, I mean, he said it was his first day off in 4 weeks, which is quite a routine. But if you then factor in his international commitments and all the travel, concerns me because if you're 5-6 games in and he's cramping up and you're already talking about workload and his exertions, well, we haven't seen anything yet, have we? Because this is a condensed championship season, and a championship season that isn't condensed is pretty grueling. We're in this Saturday-Tuesday cycle at the minute, so that is a worry. I would have to be honest, which is probably why Hugo's been starting the last 2 games, albeit Teemu started alongside him or just in behind him against Birmingham. But yeah, moving forward, that would strike me as he will be used more sparingly. And Daniel's touched on that prior to Birmingham. He was asked the question on Monday afternoon, and he just said, "Look, I almost need to manage this guy's workload now. He's not going to get any less action for his country. If anything, there's probably going to be more now, because they're obviously building up now to that delayed Euros next summer. So it's going to be pretty full on for that man for the foreseeable future. And if he's already showing signs of wear and tear, that is a huge concern, I would say, with our Norwich hat on, because we're not even in the double figures in terms of games played yet. So that's one he's going to have to monitor. He's obviously got Adam Eder there coming through. And to go right back to what we discussed at the start here, if you're only going to play Hugo up top, then obviously you can maybe bring in 1 or 2 more creative midfielders in behind him if you get the balance of the side right. So yeah, we'll monitor that. But when we heard that, A, going off with cramp, as I say, and then B, needing to be rested already is not a good sign for me.
No, and I think you can get away with that relentless schedule, I think, over a short period of time. But he's been doing this now for a few years, hasn't he? And I think we are probably beginning to see it take its toll. I guess the positive point from Norwich's perspective is 6 goals this season and 6 different scorers. So that probably suggests that there isn't necessarily as much of a burden on him than perhaps there has been in the past. And Dubai Canary sort of touches upon this point again, and he says, would it make sense to start with Jordan Hugill and Eder and to give Teemu Pukki a rest on the bench? I think I don't necessarily think that we'll see Eder from the start, but I think what we will see consistently is probably Teemu Pukki getting substituted more frequently and probably earlier within games. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, for reasons just stated, and you've obviously got Adam Eder now increasingly looking like a viable option. I think he's moving through quite quickly that transition from, somebody who gets a few minutes off the bench as a raw product to starting to be able to rely on him. Obviously, going back to the Rotherham game, that wasn't his natural position, but I thought he did add something to Norwich in terms of an attacking option, cutting in off the left. One excellent save he forced from the Rotherham keeper from range. Yes, of course, his naivety was evident in the opposite box when he obviously gave away that penalty, albeit Tim Krul bailed him out. But I just think, physically, he looks like he's been there for the last season or two. In terms of that wouldn't be an issue for him. But I think he's now, with each game he plays, maybe it's a self-belief thing. He's obviously got called up into the senior Irish squad as well in the last couple of sort of international periods, and he looks like a young man full of confidence and got his goal obviously at Huddersfield on the opening day. I really would like to see him try and get a run in the side, and that's going to be difficult now Cantwell's back in the mix, because I thought he's probably not going to be elbowed out Pukki or Hugill. So it might still be that role from the bench, but I wouldn't disagree with you. I think if Pukki is having to be managed, his workload, then let's get Eder into the contest a lot earlier than he has been doing.
Yeah, maybe I'm being a bit harsh because he's still very young, and I think he feels like he's been around for a while, but he's still extremely young. But I think I probably would like to see a bit more from him when he does come off the bench. But of course, it does take time. So he is going to be clearly an asset for Norwich City this season and going forwards as well into the long term. And whilst we're on this striker debate, Pad, Johannes has asked a question on Facebook. He said, as good as Xavi Quintilla seems to be at crossing, why are we not creating more chances with Jordan Hugill? It seems like he should be a big threat in front of the net on those crosses. He had one big chance, didn't he, on Tuesday, where I don't know if it was a Quintilla cross where it got pulled back to him and his radar was a little bit off. But it does seem like they're still trying to find that balance between sort of relentlessly getting crosses in the box and also trying to play the game that maybe we've become more accustomed to under Daniel Farke, where it's actually playing through the thirds of the pitch. Yeah,
it's that evolutionary, almost hybrid of reinventing the tiki-taka, for want of a better phrase, with a little bit more willing to go aerial and sort of try and play a bit more to Hugill's strengths. The reality is when you're playing against, as they have done increasingly this season, defences who really just sit on the edge of their own box, it's very difficult to get round the back of them and get those balls in that he can come onto. There's too often what's happening is they're getting towards the approaches of the opposition penalty box and then they're checking back in, and the balls are the delivery, the quality, I don't feel, despite we've seen glimpses. Quintilla, the one that springs to mind is the ball he put onto Pukki's head against Preston, that type of delivery. But I don't think really, the quality of the balls in are really the best example was the Max Aaron's ball for Rotherham, which was an absolute stunning cross. But that was on the, that was literally on the run, first time ball. How often did Norwich from wide areas play that type of ball into the box? It's far more measured, even though they're trying to clearly evolve a little bit with a more physical focal presence in Hugill. But I still think if you were to get him in a quiet moment, he probably would prefer a lot better service, the type of which Aaron's was serving up against Rotherham in that moment that led to the own goal, because Hugill was directly behind that defender and he would definitely put that ball in the back of the net. But that again arises from the type of game Norwich are having to play. If they're able to have a bit more space and as Rotherham did and had a go at them, as Preston did, they will have more chances on the counter to maybe attack with a bit of pace and put those type of balls in that Hugill probably prefer. Ultimately, in a minute, it's still a little bit too much incrementally approaching the box and then trying to pick a little hole. And that's not really Hugill's game. So, work in progress. But, if you've got him in the box, as Daniel said today, aerially is his strength. So they need to try and work out a way, despite the difficulties of the opposition they're facing in their mindset, they need to find a way to produce better quality for Jordan Hugill in the box.
Absolutely. Three more comments very quickly before we go to a bit more of Daniel Farke on Lucas Rupp this time. Edward Ivans on Facebook has said we have to bring our A game tomorrow if we want to progress. Kevin Hall is predicting a 3-0 win and says on the ball City. And then a question from Dan on Facebook, which again is quite pertinent at the moment. He said, what are your thoughts that Norwich fans can be at the game but inside watching the game on TV in the lounge instead of outside in the stadium? Now we won't get into the politics of it, but it is madness, isn't it, that fans can watch a game inside a lounge almost 20 yards or 20 meters, however you want to describe it, away from the pitch without actually being in an open air environment.
That's a farce, absolute farce. But we won't get into the politics of it because this could go turbo very quickly, mate. So suffice to say, I think I've seen reports Hull are going to do something similar tomorrow as well. Is this, whether by accident or by design, is this professional football clubs just trying to highlight the anomalies in the strategy clearly at the minute in terms of gatherings and social distancing? But that's just frankly ridiculous that people will be at Carrow Road tomorrow and not able to actually have sight of the pitch, yet they're consuming a game of football, which indoors, surely, from a public health point of view, as Norwich amply demonstrated against Preston, can be put on outdoors in the right controlled environment. I think Delia has been at an event yesterday, I think, to do with Delia's restaurant, I think, and she said, what more can Norwich as a club do in terms of what the government want? And I think so say all of us. But it's just, and also on top of that, you see that last week about that event at the Palladium. Was it a night with Arsene Wenger, and there was however many thousands packed in and literally sat side by side with face masks on, and apparently the O2 have got the go ahead to put on 4,000 or 5,000 events in December in a massive indoor arena. I mean, it's just frankly beggars belief. But as I say, we won't get into the politics of the situation. But that's what it is. But I don't understand the logic of it at all. So we can all hope that at some point this season there's a tipping point, and clearly there's more important things happening in the world at the minute, as we all know, as we're all living through at the moment. But if we get to a point maybe into 2021 where we can start to open up things a little bit more, then you would hope that we don't have to talk about this for the entire season, and that the only fix a football fan can get is to go to a lounge at Carrow Road and watch something on a television screen, because nobody wants that.
No, and of course, if you want to watch a game of Premier League football, then try the cinema near you. That's complete madness. But there you go. At least fans are getting to view the game, I guess, as a positive slant. Right, let's hear from Daniel Farker, and then we'll have a little bit of a chat about Lucas Rupp. As Colin said about my earlier comment, he thinks Farker is cooler because he's got a horse. Although he's didn't he say he was scared of horses at one point? So that might not be the best image for him. Here's Daniel Farker on Lucas Rupp.
I know when I judge a player, I can judge it in the proper way, and then I know Lucas Rupp has 150 games or something like this on top level in German football, and he played for proper clubs like Gladbach, who is playing in the Champions League, like Stuttgart, really a big club in Germany, like Hoffenheim. And believe me, when I get such a player, I know exactly what I get. And of course, it was a difficult start for him in a struggling Premier League side, not playing always on his best position. We knew this, and but I always trusted him that he could develop. But he has to show this for the onwards consistency. It's not like just after a few performances. Right now, I'm just over the moon and anyhow. But believe me, it's also my experience. Sometimes also a bit important to stick to your beliefs and to be a bit stubborn. We had the same topic with Vrancic in the first season. Everyone was doubting, how can this lad have an influence for us? Right now, everyone is crying when he's not each and every second on the pitch. We had this with Teemu Pukki. We were criticized that much more like a player who wasn't not good enough for the Scottish Premiership. How could he be good enough for English football? And he rocked the championship more or less all alone as the best player and winning the Golden Boot. And right now, also delight for Lucas that he proved that some of his doubters wrong.
There you go. That was Daniel Farker on Lucas Rupp. I've seen a few comments that not only was that probably his best game in a Norwich shirt, it may well statistically have been one of the best games of his career. We've had a lot of comments on here since he signed, really, about trying to define him and what exactly he does. Do you think Tuesday night was the best evidence of what Lucas Rupp is as a Norwich City player?
All day long, yeah. And as Daniel said, he dropped him into basically a Premier League relegation battle and didn't really play him. I mean, there was wasn't the league, was it? It was the Man United FA Cup tie. I thought that was his best game last season, but he was playing in a very similar role, although the shape was slightly different that day. But in the central areas, using his experience to try and break up the play. But what's impressed me, actually, in this run of 4 games that he started on the spin is actually in possession. He's actually pretty decent in terms of progressive with his passing. And I mean, there was a slalom and run the other night where he's gone past 3 or 4 players, and that's not something I would have associated with him. I just thought he was a very solid player who's appreciated probably more by the coaches and his own teammates than supporters, because I don't think he's going to do too many eye-catching things a la a Buendia or a Cantwell in that area of the pitch. But what he does give them is a nice balance and a tempo. And really, if him and Oliver Skipp can strike up a really, really good understanding, I think that could be the basis for what Norwich are trying to achieve this season. And of the two now, I think I'm more happy with Rupp at the minute. I think Skipp, such a young man, he's learning his trade to a degree, and you can see signs of naivety in some of his play and some of his decision making when he goes and presses the ball, and then when he doesn't. So of the two, I think Rupp is the more reliable performer at the minute, and I don't think too many media or Norwich fans would have said that at the start of the season. So it's a credit to him. It's also a credit to Daniel Farke that he has seen that player. That's why they went and brought him in. And okay, maybe in the first 6 months of his career in the Premier League, it didn't quite work out, but then he wasn't alone in that. But certainly at this level, as Daniel said there, 150 top-flight games in Germany for clubs who have been in and around European competition. That's a half-decent pedigree. And he's still not, I think he's either 29 or 30, so we're not talking a guy who's just here for a final payday. I think there's still decent amounts of football left in that man. And ultimately, as Daniel signed off today, he's not getting too carried away. It's 3 or 4 games. He's maintained a very good level of consistency. The challenge for that man now is that's as good as he can be. Can he maintain those levels for the duration? And if he does, as Daniel said, he will be a key influence on Norwich's season.
I'll let you and all our viewers who are watching now into a little bit of I don't know if I describe it as a sea. It's not dramatic or anything, but I was speaking to someone who works with some football clubs, looking at data and stuff like that, and he sent me a graph. I think it was just after Rotherham, and it was it was basically a graph to show the most threatening midfielders in the Championship, not in terms of who you wouldn't want to meet down a dark alley, but in terms of their play. And he was quite dramatically ahead of anyone else in the division. Of course, you have to take that in the context of it being 3 games, so that's difficult to sort of look at trends and whatnot. But quite a telling statistic, I think, for the start of the season. I think he's been quietly getting a lot better. It was interesting to see him kind of grow with confidence on Tuesday night as well. There was that moment in the second half where he tried to sort of waltz past the whole Birmingham team, and of course probably did one too many in the end, but it was positive to see compared to perhaps some of his play, which has been a little bit safe. And we talk about Kenny McLean, and we spoke about him earlier, and how much Daniel Farke likes him. I think irreplaceable was a phrase used at one point. Lucas Rupp is making sure that he can't get a kick at the moment.
Yeah, and again, one of the things that Daniel sometimes is accused of is that he has his favourites and that you will play them religiously, and McLean certainly fell into that category last season. But clearly, I think the start of this season he wasn't overly happy with what that man was producing, and allied to that, maybe again, he felt there's a blend potentially there between Skipp and Rupp that is moving forward. And obviously Jakob Sorensen comes into this mix. We've not seen really anything of him in the Championship anyway. And Alex Tete is always that backstop position as well, if required, because a lot of games probably unrealistic to expect. There's not going to be times when he's going to have to change. It's going to be enforced changes in that area of the pitch. But I think in the here and now, they are his go-to central midfielders, and it probably is a testament, to Rupp, particularly that Kenny McLean, who was so much probably one of the first names on the team sheet last season, certainly. Is now at the minute on the outside looking in. So, that tells you probably the strides that Lucas Rupp has made so far.
Yeah, he turns 30 in January, so Norwich City have got a little bit left in him as of yet. And as you said, play for some really good clubs in Germany. So hopefully we can see him string a level of performances that keeps him in that side, that's for sure. And we're all talking about Lucas Rupp positively in the weeks to come. Joe McKenzie is on Facebook. Thanks for watching, Joe. Said midfield 2 looked the part for me with Ben Gibson and Grant Hanley doing well so far. Just need the boys up top to start putting chances away. John Davey, Wycombe got to be a 5-0. I presume you mean win, John. Has it not? Edward Ivans again backing up the comment about Gibson and Hanley and how they look a good pairing. Dubai Canaries asked if you've got vodka in that bottle, which I presume is a straight no.
Is that because I'm basically talking gibberish? No, it's I won't advertise the brand of water, but water it is.
Yeah, well, who knows? If they want to sponsor us, then we'll happily advertise.
No, Connor. If they want to sponsor me, then fair enough. Come see my bank manager. You can find your own sponsor, mate.
I've had my own sponsor last year, but we won't delve into that. Mark Hilton, I've been really impressed so far with the skipping. You've said Rope, but I'm going to go skipping Rupp as the base of our midfield. However, come 60 minutes and we're still faced with a park bus, we really have to gamble and replace one of them with a more attacking person. I guess that kind of lends into the debate we had about Mario Vrancic a little bit earlier on and his qualities. Neil Luther, I think I saw a stat that muscle injuries have seen a 46% increase this season. Neil, that's a brilliant segue for us to talk about Christoph Zimmermann, who we were kind of given a really sort of brief time scheme, weren't we, in terms of him coming back. I think 4 to 5 days was what Daniel said prior to the Rotherham game. We're now we are a week on from that, and he's not going to play tomorrow. That's looking increasingly concerning, isn't it?
Well, it is, when Daniel also said today that they'd re-scanned him. It was reported as a calf injury. Rescanned him, and in Daniel's words, there's nothing showing up in terms of the original injury. Yet the player himself is still complaining of some pain when he's out on the training pitch. So something isn't quite right, and that is slightly concerning given the fairly depleted stocks they've got. I.e., Hanley or Gibson go down. It's Alex Tete at the moment, so it needs to be resolved, and pretty swiftly as well. And on a personal level, you'd hope that man could get a bit of a clear run, because really since, the summer before the Premier League season, it seems to be one thing after another with Christoph Zimmermann, and it's a shame for the lad, because when they were coming out of this division as champions, he looked a seriously good central defender who had his best years in front of him. But since then, his career has just sort of been beset by injuries, and this is the latest. Now, basically, Daniel said, probably because he's been a little bit bitten over the last few days, he can't put a timeline on when the guy is back. So ultimately, it's for Norwich's medical staff and physios to try and get to the bottom of whatever pain the boy's feeling and get him back available, because, I think it's now 15, 16 games between now and January. So, that's a lot of games to rely on Hanley and Gibson. So really, in terms of the overview picture, the sooner he's back, the better.
Yeah, and I think I saw a few comments today on Twitter basically saying that we know how this ends in terms of perhaps him going to see a specialist, and we hope that's not the case, because I remember when he first arrived at that club, particularly in the first season, he played pretty much every minute of the season, didn't he? And was a colossus for all extent and purposes, and as one injury has kind of snowballed that a little bit. So hopefully we can see him back soon. I don't think he's probably quite been where he and where Daniel Farke would like him to be at the start of this season. So hopefully he can get himself sorted. James Carter on YouTube, I think we're starting to see the balance of idealism and pragmatism we'll need in order to go back up as a better team. Just very quickly, Pad, because we're running out of time. Do you think that point stands really in terms of Norwich City maybe viewing the bigger picture and Daniel Farke realising, particularly when we speak about those midfield too in so much depth, that there is a bigger picture that they are going to have to go up as a more resilient team? You tend to see those teams who come up with a pretty decent defensive base do pretty well.
Exactly, yeah. Well, for me, the absolute signal of that was the signing of Jordan Hugill. Jordan Hugill, to that point, you wouldn't automatically peg him as a Daniel Farke type of striker / player, because there's a lot of good things about his game, but I don't think, outside the box and that sort of interplay with midfielders or bringing wide players, wide fullbacks in, which Teemu Pukki has offered to this point and was the main man for the first part of Farke's era, if you like. That isn't Jordan Hugill's game at all. So straight away, as soon as he came through the door in the summer, that was the signal, the most visible signal to me that there is a realisation that, obviously the first job is to get back, but if they were to get back, that they could actually put up a far more competitive showing than they did the last time they were there. And that isn't just Hugo. I mean, that's kind of moving on Tribal and Leitner, with the caveat that they didn't think they offered enough legs and energy, and obviously bringing in Skip on loan. Sorensen is their own player in that part of the pitch, and obviously Rupp now into the mix. So yeah, I think that's a very fair point. I think we're this season is clearly about getting back to the Premier League, but within that there's other subplots in terms of trying to develop the squad, in terms of the type of player they've got, with almost a Premier League kind of comparative element to anybody they bring in now, or any of the players they've got now. They're all clearly thinking about, it's about getting us there, but can that player then keep us there? And they obviously feel now that a big part of it, and of course Stuart Webber highlighted it pretty much after relegation was confirmed, physically, he said every week, you're playing against big, powerful players who have the technique of the Premier League player. And Norwich maybe had players with technique, but did they necessarily, to a man, have the physicality to go with it? Farker and Webber have decided no, they didn't, and they have now set about in this first window, and I'm pretty sure we'll see it again in January, trying to equip the squad with that Premier League future-proofing. But ultimately, that's all well and good. But in the here and now, they have to be able to get out of this division. And to do that, you can see that spine already taking shape now. Where you've got Krul, you've got Gibson, Hanley. Middle of the park, okay, you wouldn't say they're the biggest players, but certainly Rupp and Skip can put their foot in. And then ahead of them, you've got Hugo. And as they always say, that cliche, any decent side needs to have a good, strong spine, particularly in the Championship. And I think with those players mentioned, they wouldn't be bullied too often, I don't think, in the Championship.
No, agreed. Right, let's rattle through more of your comments. Matt Gregory, I don't care how we win tomorrow. I live in Wycombe. My neck is on the line. Well, let's hope you've got the bragging rights this time tomorrow, Matt. That will certainly indicate a good result for Norwich. Colin on Facebook, our team is evolving. It was great to see Farker finally playing two strikers from the start. The transfer window's closed and everyone is now fully focused on the job in hand. The win tomorrow will just improve the team's confidence and get into that winning habit. Yeah, there was some nice words today, which we haven't even touched upon on in terms of Todd Cantwell, but I feel like we've spoken about Todd Cantwell enough over the weeks gone by. It's good to see him back and doing his talking on the football pitch. Neil Lufer, Rupp is a decent player but needs time to settle in. Look at Marco Sleeperman, Mario Vrancic, as Daniel Farker said. Edward Ivans believes Norwich have found Lucas Rupp's best position. Neil Lufer, he likes to get a shot off, which is a positive for Rupp as well. Alex Tetty can educate Skip. Daniel Farker made that comment earlier today. Dave Williams on Periscope has said, are the tippy-tappy drills we see at Colney causing players to be too static? I don't know if Dave's privy to training, but there were moments against Birmingham, in fairness, I felt, where it probably was a little bit too static, but on the whole, probably a bit more cohesive than what we've seen in recent weeks.
I mean, but also the other side of that equation is an opponent who's going to allow them to sort of do that. I mean, the one that springs to mind is Rotherham. That goal that they equalised with, that was Skip winning the ball into Buendia, off to Steeperman, back to Buendia, into Max Aarons, all first touch passing. That to me is progressive ticky-tacky, if you want to call it that, or tippy-tappy even. But when it's, and obviously they had, because Rotherham were committed men forward, Max Aarons had space to run into and then play that killer cross, and we know how that ended. But when they've tried it, I mean, Derby, they were trying that, and they tried it again against Birmingham in areas of the pitch where Birmingham and Derby had plenty of men behind the ball, camped on their own 18-yard box, and there simply isn't the space to do it. So I think it's where they play that type of football. If they can play it in the right areas of the pitch and against an opponent who maybe aren't completely wedded to just keeping out come what may and defending for their dear lives, then that can be proved to be effective. And as Daniel said about that Rotherham move, in his own words, that is perfect Norwich. So for Daniel, as the head coach of Norwich City, that is, for him, what he wants to see on a regular basis. That type of football, but obviously, crucially, and we keep coming back to it, with the end product on the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Two more comments before we get to our Google preview video. Not quite. We probably need to come up with a name for it at some point, but we'll go with it. Two more comments, and then we'll come to that. So make sure you get your score predictions down in the comments. We'll try and get through as many of those in the last 5 minutes or the show or so. Harry Robert Walden Jr. Has said, "I fear the game will turn out to be similar to what it was like against Derby and Birmingham." Neil Lufer has said that Ben Gibson looks a great signing, not only a decent player bringing the ball out, but looks like a good motivator and a dressing room character. Before we come to the video pad, just a quick word on Ben Gibson. I also threw Jordan Hugill into this about what they've offered in terms of intangibles and what they've added to the dressing room, because it certainly seems like they're big characters within that.
Yeah, and I think it needed that. I think Closer moves on. He was a big character, wasn't he? And yeah, I mean, it felt like, that was an end of an era last season. The manner they went down, and to have not refreshed to the degree they did, I think they'd have been storing up a lot of trouble now, irrespective of the actual technical and the footballing side of that. But just as a dressing room dynamic, it needed fresh impetus. It needed big characters to come through the door. And those two Middlesbrough boys, yeah, I mean, everything we see and those lovely behind the scenes type of footage that the club put out, you can tell that they are big characters, and how they interact, I'm sure, rubs off on the rest of the group, and you need that. You need, because make no mistake, this isn't going to be an easy ride from here. It's going to be, there'll be times when their backs are against the wall, and the odds seemingly are stacked against them, and you feel a lot more confident if you've got a Ben Gibson and a Jordan Hugill on the pitch and in the dressing room as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, here's our match preview video, and then we'll come to some of your score predictions. There you go. Second largest spire in England. There you go. Don't say you don't learn anything when you watch these videos.
I don't know what you can do with that information, to be brutally honest, Connor. But you might learn.
It's not something. It's not something you can bring up, is it? In a conversation, really. Unless it's about cathedrals.
Impress your friends with the height of Norwich's cloisters. Yeah, all day long.
There you go. I'm sure someone will make use of it. I really don't know how Tony's going to keep that up for however many home games we've got left this season, but I look forward to seeing how random these get as the weeks go on. Let's rattle through a few of the score predictions, then they'll flash on screen as I ask Paddy his thoughts on the game tomorrow. So how do you see it going? Do you see it being, like we said, the longer that Wycombe are in the game, essentially, probably the more frustrating for Norwich City it becomes? Yeah,
I mean, you just feel that at some point, there has to be a tipping point, and some team has to get absolutely battered, because, every game now, 60% plus possession, shots on target, maybe not so much midweek, but I mean, they were still up around 20. They're up around 20 shots every game, and you just feel if they can get an early goal, then the floodgates could open, and whether it's tomorrow or not, I think it's coming. But yeah, I think I'd have been more confident if Wycombe hadn't gone and clearly played very well at Reading, and were probably a bit unlucky not to get something. And that's why I don't necessarily think tomorrow could be quite as one-sided in terms of the scoreline. But ultimately, I think it would be a huge shock. And I'll refer back to, the bookmakers have got them 11-1 to come and get a win tomorrow. So they don't think they've got much of a prayer, really, in a two-horse race. And it's hard to construct an argument that says Wycombe can come and stop Norwich. So, but this is Norwich, so it probably won't be as straightforward as it should be in terms of you look at the balance of power and what these two clubs are striving to achieve this season. But ultimately, I just can't see Wycombe having enough to. I mean, they've scored one goal, I think, in those 6 games, if I'm not mistaken. So it's hard to see them coming in and scoring too many goals. And if that is the case, you would think tomorrow Norwich might be able to cut loose. So I'm probably now talking myself into maybe 3-0. 3-0 Norwich. What about you?
Goodness, I'd like to see a nice, straightforward sort of 2-0, 3-0 job similar to you. But like you said, it's never that straightforward with Norwich. I'll give you a statistic in terms of Wycombe that might help that confidence a little bit more. I don't know how many shots they conceded against Reading, but prior to that, I know in the opening 5 games they conceded over 80 shots in games. So that probably suggests a little bit. And like you said, 1 goal, and that was because of Bartosz Białkowski goalkeeping error, and we all know his name. So there we go. That probably rounds us up nicely. We'll end with Andy's score prediction. He agrees with you, Pad. It's he says it's going to be a 3-0 win to Norwich. Thank you very much for joining me, Pad. Thank you all very much for watching. We will, of course, be at Carrow Road tomorrow, as will 100 or 200 supporters or whatever it is. But luckily, we'll get a view of the pitch, which we're very fortunate to have. Of course, Pinkin.com, the place to go. I have a live blog, Paddy's pointers after the game as well. All Daniel Farker's thoughts and opinions after the game. I think that just about sums it up. Stay safe. We'll be back on Monday for probably a smaller version, looking ahead to Norwich's game against Brentford. If you've joined us late, you can watch the whole thing back on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. And we'll see you all again very, very soon.